Today on 7th Circle Gaming, we analyze the game Frozen Flame. And we'll start off here like we usually do with full disclosure. And again, you are perfectly welcome to pause the video on now and read through all of this, or if you prefer not to, well heck, we'll just jump right into the screenshots. Now, the first screenshot that we're going to share with you is one of the three main parts of the game, which is the crafting system. And this is one part of the crafting system. This is what can be crafted from a crafting bench early in the game. The less time we spend on this, the better. So the second part of the game is the map that also functions as the journal from which quests can be tracked and objectives sort of kept in mind of the player. The third screenshot that we're going to share with you today is one other part of the crafting system, and this is what can be crafted from the player to sort of as they are wandering around in the game world itself, without the addition of a crafting bench. Which should really communicate to anyone who's made it through to this point of the video that the game is focused pretty much on crafting. Now then, moving right along to our first chapter, our first formal chapter, which as always is Immersion. Frozen Flame has earned a 3 out of 15. What it's going to be doing to get players immersed into the game world is it's going to be using presentation. The game is told in a third-person perspective with a polygonal art style in a fantastical world with some realistic elements, actually taking the form of gravity and the appearance of some objects. Players familiar with games like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild will be fairly familiar with this sort of idea. Secondly, the game will be using statistics to get players invested into the game world, in the sense that players obtain resources that are used in the crafting system and for purchasing upgrades for their player character. The game will be using player agency also in the sense that at the start of the game, players are given the opportunity to customize their player character. After this, the customization largely ends and is replaced by the idea of statistics focus, where in certain items that have a clearly higher statistic will be used, where other items will obviously be abandoned. So for this reason, the game has earned a 3 out of 15. Moving on to our second chapter, which is difficulty. Here the game has earned a 6 out of 15, mostly because the game's commands are fairly simple and basic. There is some learning by doing, and the rules for what utilizes stamina are kind of unclear, but again, this is something of an early access game, so we can't necessarily determine whether that is working as the game is intended in its final release, or a function of being a pre-alpha build. On the other hand, the game's options for difficulty are only basic, so take that for what it's worth, although we will add just something of a highly subjective aside, so get those grains of salt ready. The game is not easy by any standard or by any stretch of the imagination. Largely, this is going to take the form of the respawn rate of monsters. It certainly seems to be geared more toward a multiplayer experience than a single player one, so players can be overwhelmed by monsters respawning at a rate quicker than they were expecting. So then, with that, and I will caveat that with a fair amount of grains of salt. Let's move on to lasting appeal. Here the game has earned another 3 out of 15. 3 out of 15. And we did find that some self-immersion may be required in the game world, because other than the levels of customization, there isn't much to pull the player into the game world. It is possible to play through the game at a higher level or lower level of difficulty, or attempt a challenge run, but being largely a story-directed game, the player isn't going to find very much different other than how difficult it is to progress through the game. And so then, overall, Frozen Flame has earned a 4 out of 15. And here again, we're going to note that some self-immersion may be required to derive any sort of satisfaction from the game. Obviously, this is an early access game, and any judgments or statements that we make are subject to change, but as the game stands now, a 4 out of 15 is what the game has earned. And with that, I want to say that this is the end of the video. Congratulations if you made it all the way to the end, and do all the YouTube things. If you're watching a video game review on YouTube, you're probably familiar with what all that is. And from 7th Circle Gaming, goodbye.